been reading too many of these stories about this Norway gunman. I'm sure many of you know the story. We were talking about it at the end, I believe, of the show on Friday. When we went on air, there were reports that multiple car bombs had gone off in Oslo. It's unclear who it was, who was responsible for it. There was a lot of speculation that it was Al-Qaeda. And then there was a story that broke not much longer, I think maybe while we were still on air.
It was like right in the middle of the show.
That this Aryan-looking guy essentially went on to an island dressed as a cop. There was, I guess, an island off the coast of Oslo where there was a camp, sort of like a young leadership camp of members of the Labour Party, the ruling Labour Party. And this horrible human being began to shoot methodically nearly 90 people, many of them kids under the age of 16. And it has since come to light that this person was a fundamental Christianist who subscribed to I want to call it crazy, and I do think it is crazy, but I want to make sure that I'm careful to say that his belief system is certainly not outside of the mainstream of conservative belief in Europe or, frankly, in this country. And you don't need me to tell you this. You simply need to read his some 1,500-page treatise on his fears of. Well, let me read you some of this stuff. You tell me where you've heard this before, okay? You tell me. This is not to say that these people are responsible for this guy's violent acts. It's simply really to say, here's a warning to America that out of the ideological foundations that drove this man, this cesspool, came this man. And the same ideological cesspool exists in this country. And I don't mean similar. I'm saying the same. So at least 93 adults and children were killed. Doug Saunders from the Globe and Mail refers to him, says that this political terrorist claims to be a part of the Europe-wide movement opposed to Muslim immigrants and multiculturalism. 32-year-old Anders Behring Breivik has since made statements through his lawyer. He claims that he did this in self-defense. That the oncoming onslaught of Sharia law and Islamatization of his society made a question of self-defense. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, instead of sitting with a bullhorn talking about we're going to get you dead or alive, said, I'm proud of living in a country that has managed to stand up on its feet in such a critical time. We are still horrified over what happened, but we will never give up our values. The answer is more democracy, more openness, and more humanity, but never naivety. He wrote a manifesto called 2083, a European Declaration of Independence. Tell me if this function or calculation is meaningful to you. 2083 is supposedly the time where Muslims will be the dominant force in Europe, will be the majority. How many times have we heard right-wingers in this country talk about that fateful day when white people will no longer be the majority in the United States of America? His manifesto draws approvingly on the ideas of popular anti-immigration and anti-multiculturalism writers and figureheads such as Geert Wilders, Bruce Bauer, an American, I believe, Melanie Phillips, Theodore Drampel, and Canadian Mark Steyn, frequent, I believe he is the frequent Limbaugh fill-in, Mark Steyn. In order to characterize Muslims as being united in an ideological conspiracy, how many times have you heard it's not a religion, it's a political ideology, to impose a Eurabia through demographic warfare and dominate the population. From this, he orders a three-stage war, which he says will require approximately 45,000 dead and 1 million wounded, cultural Marxists and multiculturalists in Western Europe. So the difference between, let's say, Rush Limbaugh and this guy, aside from millions upon millions of dollars and literally hundreds of pounds and an OxyContin addiction and the 3 marriages and the trips to the Dominican with Viagra. Aside from those things, is that Limbaugh has not specifically laid out a plan for how many people he would kill. Limbaugh is not the one who would pick up the gun. He's got millions of dollars, folks. In the end, he can be protected from the Marxists and the multiculturalists that he rails upon by name every day. Every day. Listen to these quotes from a New York Times rundown. What we know is that he is right-wing and Christian fundamentalist, said Roger Anderson out of Norway, police official. He wanted to kill Marxists and multiculturalists. Tell me if this construct sounds anything. He had been a member of the right-wing, let's just say blank party. Let's just try it this way. He had been a member of the right-wing blank party, which began as an anti-tax protest and has been stridently anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim. In this case, in Norway, it's the Progress Party. But in his writings, he called for the development of a European party based upon the American Tea Party. Does that mean the Tea Party is responsible for this? No, of course not. What it does mean is that the ideological foundations of the Tea Party are simply one click to the left of where this guy ends up. The rhetoric, not terribly different. He said that the Conservative Party in Europe had given up its battle against multiculturalism. Is that really any different than you'd read at like redstate.org? And in fact, Marcus Buck, a political scientist at the University of Tromsø in northern Norway, said this right-wing domestic terrorism, the big question is to what extent Norwegian agencies have diverted their attention from what they knew decades ago was the biggest threat, instead focused on threats from militant Islamist groups. Does that sound familiar to you? It should. New York Times report, the man accused of the killing spree in Norway was deeply influenced by a small group of American bloggers and writers who have warned for years about the threat from Islam, lacing its 1,500-page manifesto with quotes from them. He quoted Robert Spencer, who operates the Jihad Watch website, 64 times. And getting back to that notion of Norway ignoring their right-wing domestic threat, the author of a 2009 Department of Homeland Security report on right-wing extremism, you remember this, right? It came out, it was reported. These same people, that Pam Geller from Atlas Shrugged, who was quoted in this manifesto, Mark Stein, Robert Spencer, all these people on the right wing. How dare you? How dare you say that the right wing could be a threat? He repeated his claim on Sunday that the department had tilted too heavily toward the threat of Islamist militants. Meanwhile, back to Mr. Spencer, wrote on his website, jihadwatch.org, in response to this, the blame game had begun. Can you imagine for a moment if someone who listened to the Majority Report, if someone who read Digby, quoted Digby, if someone who was on the Move On mailing list, who quoted Van Jones, went on a killing spree anywhere in the world that killed 93 people in response to billionaires and the plutocracy. Can you imagine what would be going on Fox right now? Can you imagine what would be going on in Congress right now? Is there any doubt there would be resolutions of condemnation by right-wing conservative lawmakers of all these sites? Is there any doubt? I'm not blaming Pam Geller. I'm not blaming jihadwatch.org. But they are feathers of the same bird, as it were. They're the same peas in a pod. The Gates of Vienna, a blog that ordinarily keeps a drumbeat of anti-Islamist news and commentary, closed its pages to comment Sunday due to the unusual situation which it recently found itself. I think the name of that site was actually part of this guy's ideology. It referred to 1683 siege of Vienna by Muslim fighters. So this guy, Sageman, the former CIA officer, said it would be unfair to attribute Mr. Breivik's violence to the writers who helped shape his worldview, but he said that the counter-jihad writers do argue that the fundamentalist Salafi branch of Islam is the infrastructure from which al-Qaeda emerged. In other words, if you can argue that certain ideologies, that a religion is responsible for al-Qaeda's action, he goes on to say they and their writings are the infrastructure from which Breivik emerged. If you can argue that a religion practiced by over 1 billion people in this world is responsible for the literally handful of fanatics and extremists who committed 9/11, then it is impossible not to argue that these anti-jihadist, these anti-Muslim, these anti-immigrant, these anti-Marxist, these anti-multiculturalist, these anti-liberal sites are not the very same, have the very same dynamic to this guy. You cannot argue one without arguing the other. You cannot. He cited Atlas Shrugged's recommend to the Gates of Vienna. Pam Geller, an outspoken critic of Islam who runs Atlas Shrugged, wrote on her blog Sunday any assertion that she or anti-jihad writers bore any responsibility for Breivik's action was ridiculous. I don't know that they're responsible, but it's impossible to say that they are not of the same species. Just a slight genetic mutation leads to this guy Breivik. And of course she wrote, if anyone incited him to violence, it was Islamic supremacists. In other words, there she is. saying that his actions were actually a rational response to the ideas that she espoused. And it's been, there is no indication that this guy was crazy in the sense that in a clinical way. Daryl Johnson, the Department of Homeland Security analyst, who was the primary author of that report by the Homeland Security, said in an interview that after he left the department in 2010, a number of analysts assigned to non-Islamic militancy of all kinds was reduced to 2 from 6. He said the killings in Norway could easily happen here. The Hutari, an extremist Christian militia in Michigan, accused last year of plotting to kill police officers and planting bombs at their funerals, had an arsenal of weapons larger than all the Muslim plotters charged in the United States since September 11 attacks combined. Food for thought, folks.